order. And Madam Clerk, if you would call the roll.
Senator Chambliss.
Here.
Senator Singleton. Senator Roberts.
Here, ma'am.
Representative Hill. Representative England.
Here.
Representative Simpson.
Here.
All right. Representative Hill is on live stream watching, and he had a work commitment that came up today, so he was not able to be here. And Senator Singleton is on the way, so he should be here momentarily. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. For those that are in the audience and listening online, the Joint Prison Oversight Committee did have a couple of site visits yesterday. We visited J.F. Ingram Technical College and saw the work that they're doing there with the career technical and GED and all the stuff that they're doing and the process and progress that they're making there. So a good visit there. We also went to the construction site of the new facility in Elmore, and I'm sure Commissioner Ham will talk about that when he's here. But those are both good visits. It helped us kind of see what's going on, boots on the ground type thing, and knowing where we are and where we need to be and that kind of thing. So I did want to mention those two things. So with that, Commissioner, yes, sir.
I just wanted to appreciate your leadership in setting that up and Commissioner Ham's for setting that up. That was very informative and really enjoyed the time yesterday. So thank you for your leadership in that aspect. Good.
Thank you, sir. It's a lot of times hard for us when we're out of session to carve time out of our schedules, but I think it was very productive and had good attendance there. And welcome, Senator. So with that, Commissioner Ham, if you would come and give your update, your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate y'all coming yesterday. Hopefully that was informative. There's been a lot of talk, but when you actually see it, it'll put it in perspective. And there has been a lot of activity since the last time you and I were out there together, Senator Chambliss. So it was good to see the progress. And hopefully seeing our partnership with the community college system and Ingram State Technical College, providing education opportunities for the inmates. Hopefully y'all saw that those programs are very robust. So, yes,
Mr.
sir.
Commissioner, are you going to talk? Yeah, you are. I see in your side. So I'll let you go through with your presentation. There are just a couple things that came to my mind while you're talking, but I'll let you go through first.
Yes, sir. Starting off, there's a picture of Governor Ivey addressing our last correctional officer trainee graduating class from our academy in Selma. It's 55 men and women that are correctional officer trainees that are now in the facilities. It shows that Governor Ivey, she actually supports what we're doing. She has probably done more than any governor that I can remember of trying to support corrections, and we're grateful for that. So that's something she's going to continue to do for the rest of her term, is hosting the correctional officer trainees at the mansion. Elmore Specialized Men's Facility in Elmore County. There's an aerial shot. We do drone flyovers every 2 weeks to document the construction. These aerial shots, which y'all saw something very similar yesterday. It's got the bottom left corner is what we call our B housing units, but it's basically minimum custody housing units. The one in the top left corner actually has the roof on it. The one bottom left, the 8 buildings, those will be all covered with a roof, but those are 256 beds in those pods there. So that kind of gives you and I think we have 6 different ones. Right above that, top left, no, that's not the medical unit, but y'all went in the medical units. They're kind of in an 8 shape where we'll have a little over 700 beds for our medical and mental health, where we're treating, as we gave some numbers to y'all yesterday. Yes, sir.
Sure.
thank you for being here. And I echo what Representative Simpson said. It was very informative yesterday, and I thank the chair for providing an opportunity and y'all for opening your doors. But you provided some information to us yesterday, and I think it's worth the public noting that population, you mentioned mental health. Could you give us an idea of how large your population is and how many of those individuals are on some sort of psychotropic medication and you're required to treat?
Yes, sir. Don't hold exact to the number because Chief Lovelace gave out those numbers. He was reading for something, so I'm on from the top of my head, but we'll be close. As you'll see later on, we have a little over 21,000 inmates. I think there's about 7,500 that are on mental health caseload. So mental health workers for the department and our medical provider are seeing about 7,500 inmates for some type of mental diagnosis. Of that 7,500, we have over 3,000 that have SMI, serious mental illness diagnosis. So we probably have about 13,000 prescriptions for those individuals. So yes, people have said it over the years, but with those numbers, we're the largest mental health provider in the state.
And I think it's important to note about that as well, that you also got individuals that are dual diagnosed.
Yes,
that are both suffering from mental illness and also some sort of drug addiction. And, we probably can't put like attach a real number to how large or how the population has multiplied since the we'll say 2015 or 2014 or around there, when Governor Bentley made the decision to close facilities across the state. But I could imagine that transition from closing long-term facilities for those with mental illnesses and those with other sorts of mental health consumers that can't be treated but basically maintained. It would be interesting to see how quickly the population shifted from the facilities that we had in the state that were closed, and how quickly that population shifted to our prisons across the state. Because one of the things that we don't do very well in Alabama is take care of those that are mentally ill. It's one of our biggest failures on either side. If you've got something that's treatable, you need a doctor, or something that's not treatable, you need care and counseling. We fail on both sides. And unfortunately, where we see the biggest population explosion is for you. And you become, as you said, the biggest mental health provider in the state. And at the core of determining if somebody's guilty or not guilty of some sort of criminal offense is determining whether or not they can even appreciate the nature of their offense. And to tell me that there are 7,000 people who are incarcerated with a mental illness, 3,500 or so of those with a serious mental illness, it begins to question that if a large percentage of our prosecution of individuals doesn't end up being in place of treatment. So it's unfortunate that you become that, but it's just an unfortunate reality of some really bad decisions that have been made policy-wise in previous administrations.
Thank you, Representative. Continue, Commissioner.
So, like I said, these are just examples of the housing units. Like I said, we do have a little over 700 beds for those individuals. We also have more beds for step down as they, get compliant with their medication, and their mental health worker, tries getting them back into population. So that's, I think, number given out yesterday, about 42% complete of the whole project. There were roughly 790 construction workers out there. Still anticipate that to get to around 900 or 1,000 before completion. So a lot of activity. Right here, the State House that y'all are constructing, have 2 cranes. We had 7 out there yesterday. Got 1 coming late yesterday, early today, and 1 next week. So we'll have 9 cranes out there moving a lot of the concrete, the cell modules, and the tilt-up is, Senator Chambliss, you certainly explained, tilt-up is a lot cheaper than pouring concrete vertically. So we have that going on. Constituent services, that's something last year, worked with the chairman and members of the committee and legislators about constituent services. We talked about how we need to vigorously improve in this area of dealing with inmate families and when they call the facility. So with that legislation, there were some things that, excuse me, were put in place and some positions. So just to report a little bit on there. The form, in the legislation, it says DOC will have a form on its website. That form is now live where individuals can fill it out and it will be received. It will go to some of our constituent service workers, the information, which facility they're in, to actually check on that issue that family, friends, or whoever is inquiring about that inmate. So that was in the legislation, putting the form on there. We still have our means where individuals call the facilities, they call the central office, they call our legal department, and that we're still trying to fine tune that. We're also looking at individuals that do not have internet access, coming up with a 1-800 number that they can call and have a service that will triage and basically fill this form out for them, and it will be sent to us so we can act accordingly. And of course, part of that is also reporting back to the committee. Ms. Mest and I think Dr. Motts are working well together. That's relatively new, so I know as that process goes on, it'll certainly improve over time. So last thing about the positions. In the legislation, there was a coordinator approved and 14 individuals to be at the 14 major facilities. Those are exempt positions. We're working on the job announcements. I think the committee has gotten those and have some comments. So once we get those back, we'll be able to put that out and start first with the coordinator, and then we'll go with the liaisons in the facility. We have, Dr. Motts has identified individuals at the facilities now to fill that role, but we will be hiring full-time people for that. Yes, sir.
Representative.
Thank you for the recognition, Mr. Chairman. I want to congratulate you on this specific issue as well. And Senator Chambliss, I know you carried this legislation. This is one of the biggest pieces of legislation, and especially coming from this committee, that can actually make a difference. I see many family members that have spoken up in the meetings in the past, and we sat here in December of 2023 and heard from your family members and heard their complaints and heard their frustration with the lack of communication. So I understand the process of the legislative process works slowly sometimes, but I want everybody to understand this is because of you and because of your voices that you spoke up at these meetings. We were able to put legislation in place. We're able to make a difference, and now families in the future will be able to have better contact with the prison system because of what came from that meeting in December of 2023. Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership and your sponsorship of that bill.
Well said, and that was a group effort, and certainly members of this committee and also DOC work together to try to make that happen. And we're not there yet, so there are still problems. We're not saying they're over, but we're saying we're moving in the direction to try to solve them. So yeah, I appreciate those comments.
And the form that, well, matter of fact, there it is, that's on our website. You know, of course, we sat around, but we also had other individuals and groups look at this form, give us input. I think we might even send it to the committee, but I know Ms. Crowder and Appleseed, they looked at it. They had some comments, and we took some of those, and especially the date and time stamp, which most technology things like this does have a date and time stamp when it was actually filed, so we'll know when we get it so we can stay on top of that.
Representative England.
And I just want to, again, echo Representative Simpson's comments about that. I think that's, you know, like I said, like you said, the process moves slow, but it's moving. And to that end, just want to make sure that we encourage and continue the dialogue about that, because we're also, as part of this committee, we've also been given the responsibility of passing on some of the things that we see, we hear, some of the emails that we've gotten, and for what it's worth, the infrastructure as the demand increases has gotten better. So we've gotten the ability also when we receive some of these emails to pass them on. And I'll tell you, is Jeff here? There have been several occasions where I'll get something from an email, pass it on to him, and within a few days, I'll get a report back from Laura and also from Jeff about something that's changed as a result of a complaint that a family member has given. So, I mean, you may not always see it move slow sometimes, but the response times over the last couple of years have dramatically increased. And a part of that is due to the fact that, we've got legislation in place and we're putting infrastructure to make it happen. But you've also got several employees and on your side that are working really hard to try to become more responsive, and that's huge.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that because it is something, as we worked with y'all, we're committed to. However, we needed these positions that's going to be 100% what they do, is respond to inquiries and gather information so we can pass it along. Because, face it, right now, we do have a staffing issue, both on the security side and the non-security side. So someone that normally would handle these, they might not be in a position to handle them that day. So like I said, it's time. We need to be more timely on our responses. So hopefully this is going to even cut down some more, as you said, Representative England.
So, Commissioner, I have a saying that I've kind of developed over the years that it's hard to do forest management when you're fighting the forest fire. You're fighting the forest fire, so that was the whole point of these additional staff members. Their job is not to do DOC day to day, but their job so I think we're headed in the right direction with that. I'm be glad when we get those people in place, and I think that will help everybody in that communication standpoint. So I guess, and Senator Roberts wanted to say a word too, but the thing that I want to, I guess, kind of stress about this piece of legislation and the things that are coming from it, it was a collaborative effort. We all talked. There are some things that we thought, and then we did them a little differently after we had more information. There are some ideas that y'all brought to the table that we didn't think about. So it was a very collaborative effort, and we're not done. We'll figure out what we need to tweak and all that going forward. So,
absolutely. And the form, looking at it, one of the things, we wanted to get it out there as soon as possible. And, a lot of times people want it to be perfect before they roll it out. And, perfection's the enemy of good. So there will be some revisions to it when everybody starts putting eyes and using it. So we welcome those comments. And I'm pretty sure our IT director put a thing in there where you can add feedback, like, hey, this doesn't work, or, how about this? So we're looking forward to getting those comments.
okay.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Roberts.
Mr. Commissioner, and I will follow up what Representative Simpson and England have said. It has been a pleasure to work on this, and to the families, I would echo what Matt Simpson just said. We've gotten feedback 2 times in the last year, meeting with many of you and hearing your comments. We understand. We have children, we have grandchildren, we understand to the best of our ability, and this whole team approach, thanks to the leadership of Senator Chambliss, we have come together, and I really feel like we are making great progress now. It's not totally fixed, but it's getting better. So thank you for the efforts of coming and speaking and showing up. So I just wanted to applaud you for that. And look, it's a broken system. So much, we've got lots of problems, but we've made great progress. So thanks for your patience with us on this, but I believe you're going to see improvement.
Thank you, Senator. All right, Commissioner.
All right, here's some statistics Dr. Motz has pulled together on so far from March to August 31st on some of the calls, 2,085 inquiries, and right over there on the left in the yellow will kind of tell you what some of them are. Questions about released, health-related, inmate welfare check by family, visitation, reporting facility incidents. The top three facilities inquiries, Limestone, Bibb, Staten, and top three divisions, of course, getting the inquiries is our new Constituent Services and Central Records and Operations. Central Records gets a lot of calls because that is the repository for DOC on transcripts, sentencing and that type stuff. So people do have a lot of questions about that. So, and we appreciate inquiries. Now, from our experience, vast majority of them are unfounded, but the ones that are, I appreciate them because that might bring something to my attention that I didn't know, so we can work on fixing it. So 2,085 during that period of time, I'm sure as people find out about our form on our website, that will go up, but then I anticipate it to probably level off after we refine our processes a little bit.
Well, and that's one of the issues with the form, that the information, the complaints that we're getting, sometimes it doesn't give us near enough information to figure out what it is that we need to correct. So that's the point of the form, is to get enough information for us actually to spend our effort fixing a problem instead of trying to find out what the problem is. So I think the form will be helpful in the long run.
And I'm pretty sure our IT director, there's a box in there that you can put text in, and I think you have to put something in before you can submit the form. So that would be helpful, for people putting that in.
Yeah.
So next, our inmate population, a little over 21,000. It has kind of went up and down a little bit, a couple of hundred over the last several months, but we're staying around the 21,000 mark. One thing that we also have going that will be beneficial to y'all, as Representative Ingham talking about policy decisions and things in the future, is Sentencing Commission has the ability, we working with them on being able to do population simulations, putting in information and what's the population going to be in 2026, 2027, with laws that are passed by the legislature or other factors going into it. And the gentleman's done these simulations before, and I mean he's extremely accurate. So within 1-2% error. So it's pretty good. We're excited about that, not only for ourselves in making long-term decisions, but sharing that information with the legislature so y'all can also make some informed decisions.
Representative Ingham.
Does that gentleman have a name?
That's doing this?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Who is it?
Dr. John Spear.
We got, and also we got our own expert too.
Okay.
Bennett.
Who? Ben? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
You can tell, he can tell you down to the number, and also what we do and how it impacts the prison population. He's really, really good at his job, and I don't think we pay him enough. I'm just going to be honest with you.
I'll tell you what, Mr.
But and to that end, though, I just wanted to kind of put this out there too. Every time we pass a bill in the legislature that involves a budget or paying money, we attach a fiscal note to it. I don't think it would be too far beyond and too much work for every time that someone sponsors a bill that creates a crime or increases punishment, that we attach a note to it so anybody who's sponsoring that bill knows the impact that it will have on the job that you're required to do. Because sometimes we kind of just throw things out there. as to pretend like it's a deterrent, but then the actual practical effect of it, because of the impact it has on the population itself, it actually works against the intent, because the more people you put in the system, the longer it takes to matriculate through the system, which means that the people that you think you're incarcerating longer actually stay out longer. It actually works against public safety. So I think for us to fully inform us when we attack a problem by trying to create a crime or increase a punishment or make a sentence longer, I think it helps, just like we know how much money it's going to cost when we pass a bill, but to also know the impact on the system itself when we pass laws that increase punishments or require longer sentences. And also, I want you to tell folks, too, that I learned something new yesterday, and I don't think it's public knowledge, that the new facility itself is over 300 acres. By the time it's up, operating at its full capacity, it's going to be bigger in population in a number of cities, population centers and counties. That's huge. And then to also hear that some of the buildings on the property cost, $20 million or whatever, that's something that we all should know. That this is, by the time it's got its own infrastructure, it's going to have a population bigger than when it has incarcerated folks there and employees there. It's going to be larger than a lot of county seats. That, I think that's information that we should know. Because on one end, it details how difficult the job you have is with the resources that you have. But it also points out that there are other components of the system that don't work at all that are making your job more difficult, to the point you have a low risk, you're going to have a low risk or a minimum risk wing of this new facility that's going to have a lot of people that likely probably shouldn't even be there. So again, I think you should continue marching and beating on that drum that these are the resources that are required for me to do my job. This is how large it is, and that also not everybody's helping me.
Thank you, sir. And when people ask me about it, one of the ways that I describe it is that we're building a hospital, we're building a mental health facility, we're building a prison, and a community college, all in the same spot. So it is large. And but the thing that I came away with yesterday is the way that those facilities are designed and arranged is going to provide a lot better outcomes, in my opinion, from a layman just looking on point of view, because you have opportunities for privileges, and then when those don't take those seriously and or do things, you have opportunities to get them away from the group as a whole. So, and it also is, it's not like 4,000 people in this big old building. It's not like that at all. It's separated out into this. It's like it's a campus. I think you said there's 54 buildings.
Yes, sir.
So when something negative happens in one particular quad or pod or whatever y'all are going to call it, the folks over on the other side never even know that. And it will allow you to control things a whole lot better. So,
yes, sir, and appreciate that. And part of our issues now is such a large number of dormitories rather than the cells that this facility will have. So that will certainly help us protect the population a little bit better.
Yes, sir.
But
so on to the staffing.
oh, well, I was going to comment on Mr. England's
Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
We had a good collaborative effort on the constituent services, so I was going to suggest all bills that will have sentencing or deal with corrections, why don't it come to this committee and y'all y'all kind of vet it real good, and we can work on it and then see about passing it.
We actually have that ability, but we don't have that requirement.
Because a lot of times we pretty much know what the consequences are. It's the unintended consequences that usually gets us. So,
Well, and that's what's, in my opinion, great about this committee is we have a diversity of thoughts and opinions.
oh yeah.
And we have pretty intense discussions sometimes. And that's good. That is a good thing. So
That
we
is.
appreciate that. So,
That is good.
okay,
So
go ahead and continue.
staffing, that's something from day one, coming in, put a lot of effort, and we have some very good people right now on hiring, recruiting, and trying to retain correctional officers, because that's the crux of a lot of our stuff. So right now, as you can see, the field, the vacant and total budgeted positions, both, as I said earlier, security and non-security, we still have a lot of vacant admin positions. And depending on what that admin position is and how critical it is to the department, sometimes a correctional officer is pulled to do that function. So it's kind of a double-edged sword sometimes, but we're working on it. I know state personnel has revamped some of the jobs that's going to help us. We have a large number of vacancies in our accounting classifications. That's extremely important for us. We also, they've revamped the trades. We have our own, electricians, plumbers, all that kind of stuff, trying to maintain these facilities. So they've helped revamp that, and we hope it's going to improve some of our recruitment of those non-security folks that are essential to our operation. But right now, don't think have a, well, yeah, let me go on to the next one. Recruiting, that picture right there is the current class at our academy in Selma, 99 individuals for correctional officer trainees, largest class in many, many, many years. So we're pretty proud of that, but it goes to the hard work of our folks trying to recruit, hire, and maintain. So as on the left-hand side in the black, CSGs. A lot of people know that from years ago. When they created it, they called it a basic correctional officer. Well, the state personnel job classification is a correctional security guard. So that's what they do not have to be certified through the Peace Officer Standard and Training Commission, but we do give them 6 weeks of training at the academy. So as you can see, the 4 classes right there, the numbers that have graduated. It says 5 pending. The individuals in the colored vest, those are the CSGs in that class, and that's the reason we say it's pending. Got to make sure they graduate. I think they're in week 3 or 4 of the academy, of a 10-week academy. So the A-post class, you can see we graduated 61, 54, 55, and we have the 99 pending. So hopefully we were over 100, but we always lose some the first week or 2 of the academy. So we're hopeful that that 99 will stick.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Singleton.
Yes. I think on one of your graduations, I spoke at your graduation.
Yes, sir.
And we were
Fine
talking.
job.
And we were talking about numbers in terms of retention. Out of these 99 that you have here, if they're A-post, how many are you able to retain? Because it seems that the sheriff departments and everybody else start to recruit your members once they get A-post certified. How are you able to maintain and retain those?
Well, we hope, and of course, won't know about these 99 for a little bit. We figure if we can keep them a year, 18 months, then we're in good shape. One of the things we've had on the retention part is, just be honest, you get out of the academy and you go to your facility, and the warden, he's needing somebody so desperate, he just sticks you out there on a post, and you don't get the on-the-job training that you should do. So we have actually putting, I think, 14 field training officer sergeants. So if you're a warden of Kilby and you're getting 10 of these 99, then that field training officer is going to have those 10. They're not even going to be yours, the warden, that field training officer, until he signs off that they're proficient and can do their job, usually, several weeks after they arrive. So that we feel like is going to certainly help on our retention.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other? Okay.
So
All right, go ahead.
bottom right on the yellow, 415 in 2024, hopefully correctional officer trainees graduating the academy. We hope to surpass that number next year. I think the next academy class will start at the end of January, and I think we've already hired about 45 for that class. Here's just some of the stuff, some of it's from last time. We've really seen increase when we started putting our job postings on Indeed. We've had 98 hiring events so far, got 27 more to go. 1,663 candidates have shown up at these hiring events. And that's how you have to show up to one of the hiring events to get hired. So we have our Activate partnership with the community college system. Told y'all a little bit about that yesterday. That has proven extremely successful in our one program. We're starting another one about the middle of December. So once they complete that 6-week Activate training, they roll right into the regular academy. So, all right. Sometimes we get talking about we don't have any programs going at Department of Corrections. Well, we do. Right here we list off some of the 5 substance use disorder programs. Industry has 7 plants statewide that they have training programs for inmates. Of course, y'all saw Ingram State Technical College and their workforce pipeline. Our faith-based programs, we have honor dorms all throughout the state. Do we need more? Yes, but we do have them. And an important thing that's always brought up, sometimes talk about with inmates not getting their Social Security card when they leave, they need identification. They've been getting Social Security cards for, I know, 30 plus years. Now, sometimes some of those do fall through the cracks. However, and they have to sign 2 forms. Social Security Administration requires them to sign 2 forms before they actually get the card, and that's some of the issue. So we're working on 2 other important forms of identification, either a driver's license if they qualify or a state-issued photo ID and a birth certificate. Well, we've kind of hopefully got the birth certificate issue solved. I signed an MOU with Department of Public Health the other day on them sending names they do in birth certificate searches and providing a birth certificate for the inmates we request. Now, that's just good for the state of Alabama. Outside, that's going to be another issue, but vast majority of our inmates are from Alabama. So that will be a very important piece of the identification. So when they do go out and they're part of the reentry or go to probation and parole, that they will have those identifications to where they can get jobs, open bank accounts, conduct business. The part on the photo state ID, that's one of those external issues that we're working with the LEA. They're the driver's license issuance. They have their own system, so we have to have a dedicated circuit to get that information. A private company provides those circuits, and we're at their mercy, and what they have proposed at our test site is not a big enough circuit for the information. So we're continuing to have that battle. But once we succeed on that, they should have all 3 forms of identification when they leave. So I think that's...
That photo ID, if you will, maybe you and I and Secretary Taylor schedule a time and let's talk about that. That's been a directive for a long time. That's not new. So maybe the 3 of us can sit down and whatever committee members want to and figure out what the problem is and what we can do to fix that.
Might need y'all's help because, like I said, it's Aaliyah and us are working together, and of course their new updated driver's license system certainly beneficial in this. So I will be happy to set that up whenever you need to.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Just going through 83 inmates graduated from substance abuse program at BIB. Man, speaking of BIB, we've turned BIB pretty much into a programmatic institution where vast majority of individuals there are going through some type of program. So that after we refurbished a lot of the dorms, that program has just kicked off. So we're certainly excited about that. There's other substance abuse graduation pictures, so we do have a lot of classes going on. There's Ingram State Technical College. You know, they teach the most in-demand trades to the inmates, the ones that, like I said, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, diesel mechanics, the ones that businesses are calling, inquiring about, do you have anybody? So it's real good that they're very flexible in meeting the public's demand on that and training our inmates on those skills, and they are certified when they leave. So had a little thing, they did say their enrollment has increased 33%, so we do encourage them to take advantage of the programs. We've expanded our criteria for them to participate. So,
And that will be much easier in the new facilities. You're not having to bus from site to site in that situation.
absolutely, we bus, well, yes, sir. That, you know, we got a couple of facilities. I know Red Eagle, we bus them, so it will certainly be a lot easier.
Representative England.
And that's one of the things that I took away from yesterday more than anything else, is there are a lot of inspirational stories and people really trying their best to do whatever's necessary to not only demonstrate that they're ready to be released, but to be prepared when they are. And the state of Alabama spends an extraordinary amount of money and resources in Ingram State to make those things cost effective. Because obviously being incarcerated makes it difficult for us to require some sort of payment for what they're providing, right? So a lot of that stuff has to be free in order to be effective. So when they ever manage to get out of the system, that they're prepared so they don't come back, right? So we saw so many different things, people working on HVAC, people working for welding, cosmetology, learning how to code, all these things in our facilities that we are investing in to provide the necessary hope for those folks to continue to strive to be released, again, in hopes that all of those things that they do to demonstrate that they're ready to be released actually helps them get released. And I would hate to continue to invest this money knowing that people stop doing those programs because they realize they're not effective. And I want to stress this. You've got a very difficult job, right? It's like one of the hardest jobs in the state. The hardest job in the state. And we should be doing whatever's necessary to make your job a little easier, meaning providing hope for those that are incarcerated so they're easier to manage. That helps you. What also provides hope is to know that when I actually get incarcerated and I make that determination in my own mind that I'm going to change my life and I do everything that's necessary to reflect that when I come up for parole, I get a fair hearing to get an opportunity to be released and not be held accountable for something that happened 20 to 30 years ago, but to be held accountable for the person that I'm showing you I am today. Because as soon as that person walks away from that situation after doing whatever they've been told to do, and they've done it the right way, and they're told no, what do you think, how does that make your job? What does that do for you, and how do you manage those facilities? Because guess what happens?
Oh, I know.
Is that they know that I can just EOS regardless, and again, 94% of the people in your custody are going to get out anyway. Well, they can just wait till they EOS and cause hell for you while they're there. It's hope.
Absolutely.
It's a system that works. It's proven to work all over the country, but for whatever reason, we haven't figured it out here. But I'll tell you, one way or another, it's either going to cost us, it's going to become prohibitively expensive for us to house and to care for folks, or then either that or we're going to figure out how to properly manage the system that we have.
And sometime in the near future, you'll probably get some information. We're working with the community college system, and that smart fellow you talked about, Bennett Wright, the recidivism rate for when you do go through educational program provided by Ingram, I think those numbers will be
Outstanding.
yes.
And we could see it yesterday. Also, one of the best moments from the day yesterday was when Senator Roberts spoke to a classroom full of folks who were full of hope at that time because they were actually giving them life skills there to prepare resumes, how to interview, and what to do next. Can you imagine doing all of that while you're incarcerated and then getting to the end of the road where all that's supposed to matter and it doesn't? So, again, we're doing so many wonderful things within our system that you're a part of, that Ingram State is a part of, to prepare people to be released and to be successful. I just hope it matters.
I do. And that's another thing, and we'll have a comment. Kilby Honor Dorm Family Day. That's something that happened a couple of weeks ago. Church of the Highlands, and not endorsing anything, in Fraser Church, we have a very large faith-based volunteer contingency. We have a lot of groups that volunteer. Church of the Highlands, I think, is in 25 of 26 of our facilities. They do a great job. All the others do a great job, Kairos. But this was Fraser Church here in Montgomery and Church of the Highlands, and went, for the Honor Day, Family Day. So we had some, family members coming in, and that's certainly important in the reentry process. So that's something we're proud of. And, I guess a lot of times Representative Simpson asked yesterday, what can we do to help? One, to get this information out. We can get it to you because we put it on social media all the time. We tell everybody, but it's not getting out. So y'all could help with that. And we would certainly appreciate it because we got warts, we know it, but we are doing good things. So we want to get the good out as well, not just, being a punching bag for all the bad things. That's Captain Obvious. We know what's going on. We're trying to fix them, but there's no silver bullet. It is going to take a massive effort for a long time. So we're on that road. And back to the original slide, any other questions?
Other comments or questions from the committee? All right, Commissioner, thank you for your time. Thank you for your time yesterday. That was helpful.
Thank y'all. I
We appreciate
coming.
us being able to work, and we'll continue to work to try to make things better.
Yes, sir. Thank y'all.
Thank you, sir. All right, at this time, we have Ms. Lee Gwatney with the Pardons and Parole Board. How are you doing, Madam Chair?
Good morning, Chairman Chambliss, and to the committee members. Thank you so much for having us, and good morning. I am here, but I am joined also by the other members of the Parole Board. We have Mrs. Simmons and Mr. Littleton who are here with us today, and we want to thank you for having us and the opportunity to be here. This is certainly not my first time with the committee, but always a pleasure to be here to listen and to learn, to provide y'all with any information that we can. Today, the committee has the packet of information that we provided yesterday for each of the members, some data, statistics, and information that we wanted to share prior to the meeting. So I hope and anticipate that each of you have that information with you today. But as I said again, we're here. I know that we weren't able to be here at the last meeting because we had hearings that were previously scheduled. You may know that we docket our hearings about 3 months ahead of time. We also are currently having hearings today. We have taken a recess from those hearings in order to appear here before the committee today and to provide any information that we can and to answer any questions that we can. We've taken a recess and have those good folks in recess over there, and we'll start back with hearings when we return today. But it was important for us to be here with you all today. As I introduced our other board members to you today, y'all, I think all of the committee members are familiar and have had a chance to meet and to spend time with Mrs. Simmons and Mr. Littleton and myself. As you know, all three of us were appointed by Governor Ivey to serve on the board, and we serve 6-year terms. We come from very diverse backgrounds. And Senator Chambliss, I heard you say something earlier today that I thought was so appropriate both to our board as well, when you mentioned that we have a diversity of thoughts and opinions, and that is true of our board as well, which I think is based upon our diverse background, and I think is true of how we do our business at the board, which is why I think that Governor Ivey appointed the three of us with our differing backgrounds and how we conduct our hearings and our business every day. And yet one of the things that I am so very proud of each day is the congenial and very positive atmosphere that the board has, not just among the members, but there at the hearings as well. I know that y'all had the opportunity yesterday to visit the new prison site, and always welcome everyone to attend one of the hearings there. Happy to give the committee an overview of how we conduct business there at the board, if that would be appropriate at this time.
I think, yeah, that'd be great. Maybe take 2 or 3 minutes.
Sure, absolutely. So as you know, along with having parole hearings, one of the things we do every day is pardon hearings as well. That often is not discussed as much as parole hearings, but I do certainly want to mention that. But we have both pardon and parole hearings all day long, where Mrs. Simmons and Mr. Littleton and I sit as a board. As the chairman, I preside over those hearings. And we always like to tell everybody at those hearings, as well as what we would like to do today, is to make certain that everyone here knows that the bulk of our work takes place long before those hearings ever begin, where we study at great length the files that come before us long before anybody ever appears for the hearings that day. We always like to make sure that everyone knows that no decision is made solely based upon the testimony that is offered at that hearing, though the testimony that is offered is very significant to the board.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
can I ask you a question? You mentioned the files that come before you.
Yes.
What is in those files? Who prepares those files? What are you looking at?
Yes, absolutely. Those files are prepared by the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles, and we know now that we kind of have 2 separate agencies in a way that are housed within one building, what we call the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles, where the executive director is Cam Ward, and then the Board of Pardons and Paroles that is made up by the 3 of us. To be very clear, the board has no staff. We are simply 3 people appointed by the governor. So we have no staff, we have no budget. So the Bureau prepares all of those things. They docket the files for us. We are the people who are appointed by the governor to hear the cases and to make the decisions. So those files are prepared by Bureau staff for us, and the docket is prepared by Bureau staff. Files contain a tremendous amount of information, and sometimes files can be 6 and 7 volumes thick. I mean, one file could be this big. It contains the inmate's entire history in the Department of Corrections, as well as information provided by local jurisdictions. So, just to give you, and this will not be an entire picture, I'm sure inevitably I will leave something out, but those files will contain, of course, the guidelines, mental health assessments, criminal histories, victim impact statements, support statements from anybody, family members, or anyone wanting to write in support of the inmate. The classes that they have taken at the Department of Corrections. We know whether those classes that they have taken are rehabilitative in nature or not. We know if they have refused to take a class. We know if they have had a discipline after that class has been taken, or if they have been revoked after a class was taken. In terms of criminal history, we know if they are a multi-state offender. We know how many failures they have had on supervision. We know what their social history is, often dating all the way back to their childhood. Things like IQs, if they have had types of neurological issues, things of that nature. When I talk about mental health assessments, again, we oftentimes have reports that go span throughout their lifetime. We ask and look for as robust of a picture as possible. It can be looked at that we are only looking for one side of things. That could not be further from the truth. We look for as big and total and complete of a picture as possible. We have medical records, oftentimes. We have, and when I talk about letters, I know I talked about victim impact statements as well as support letters from the inmate's family or loved ones. I want to talk about that briefly for a moment because we are very sensitive to the fact that not everyone can come to Montgomery for a hearing. And that's whether they might live in the northern part of the state or the southern part of the state. But they also might live right here in Montgomery and are precluded from coming to a hearing because they can't get off work or they don't have child care. A number of things that prohibit everyday citizens from coming to a hearing, whatever their thoughts are, whether they are in support of parole, not in support, or in support of a pardon, or protesting. So we have said...
Madam Chair, if you would pause for a second. Gentlemen with the press, y'all are disturbing this meeting. If you can sit there and listen, that's fine. If not, you're going to have to go to the back of the room, okay? Thank you.
So we've set up what I believe, and this started really back during COVID, which was close to the beginning of my appointment to the board, but was an approach to be able to embrace everybody that wanted to let the board know how they feel about a pardon or a parole. And it was, it's an approach where people can let their views be known to the board however they want it to be known. And that is, they have an option of writing in, and we have a wonderful staff at the Bureau that handles all of those communications. So whether they write in or they want to email in, and we tried to be to think through that very well. And I know that Ms. Musk she may remember that. But we know not everybody has email. Not everybody is technologically savvy. They may want to write, but we also know that might not be a possibility. So we have people that take phone calls. All of those things are then placed in the file and have a very specific way that they are brought to the attention of the board.
Okay,
yes,
if we can pause right there. Do you have a Representative England about the input?
You mentioned that you take all that into account.
Yes, sir.
Do you hear from the applicant?
Yes, we do. Thank you so much for that question. Because again, I think that is sometimes a misunderstanding, because people, will ask us if they come to the hearings. And of course, Representative England, as you know, they don't come to the actual hearings. But we have a wonderful group of officers, and they're called institutional parole officers. And they meet with every inmate prior to...
I'm sorry. My question is, do you hear from the applicant?
Yes.
Directly?
Yes, oftentimes we do. May I explain?
Do you, I guess I'm asking a bad question. Does the applicant get the opportunity to address your board, him or herself?
Yes. May I explain?
Yes.
Okay. Every inmate has the opportunity to write to the board, and many of them do. I can think on every day that we have hearings, I can tell you that there are files where we have direct communication from the inmate in written form. We also have...
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't think you're understanding my question. So the answer to my question is no. You do not hear directly. You don't get the applicant does not get an opportunity other than writing a letter to speak to you.
I think what you're saying is
that's not
person.
correct.
In person.
In person.
Okay, in person, no. And that was what when I started answering the question, I said, that is correct. They do not appear in person. But there are other forms in which the inmate communicates with the board.
Do you think that would help your decision-making process to hear from the applicant in person?
We do hear from the applicant. And if I could,
I mean, I don't know if I'm just asking a bad question. So maybe if I'm more specific, if through electronic means from the facility they get the opportunity to attend their hearing and make a statement on their own behalf directly to you, where you have the opportunity to ask questions of them just like everybody else that appears in person, would that help your decision-making process?
I believe that the process that we have right now, is an excellent process because of the way that our institutional parole officers conduct the interviews with these inmates and talk with them in a very thorough interview in which these institutional parole officers are trained to interview them in light of their risk assessments, in light of all of the information the institutional parole officers have, and then layered on top of that, because that is a very specific process, that then on top of that, the inmates, if they elect to, and many of them do, they may then, in addition to that interview, may write to us. They may also submit a videotaped statement if they would like to submit a videotaped statement. And again, we had one this week where we had a videotaped statement from an inmate at their parole hearing. So yes, I believe that our state has one of the most robust systems in which inmates are interviewed, and that interview is provided to the board through that process with an institutional parole officer.
How many institutional parole officers do we have? And not a specific number, 500, 500, I mean, just in general.
I'm not clear because that falls under Director Ward.
Yeah. Okay, about 20. Okay, thank you. All right, if you would just continue with the process and what y'all do.
Sure. I will. I could go on with all of the information that is contained in the file, but I'm not sure if the committee wishes for me to continue with that. That certainly, where I think I left off, was not all-encompassing of the information that is in our file, but those things are studied long before the hearings begin. And then, of course, the hearings begin. Each side comes in. Each side has the same number of people who are allowed to speak that day. The side that is protesting may have an additional 1 or 2, and that is solely because of federal law that is dictated by the Crime Victims Bill of Rights. Each side has the same length of time that they are allowed to speak, and that is determined by a timer, because this board takes great length to treat each side with dignity and respect and fairness.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Singleton.
Yes, Senator Singleton.
in that process, are there dialogue between you and the persons who's making the testimony? You get dialogue back from them?
Yes.
You question them? Wouldn't you think the same for the applicant, that there may be something in a writing or maybe something in that tape recording that never inquisitive of y'all to say, well, I would like to ask him what he meant about that, and to be able to have that kind of dialogue so that the applicant can further explain exactly and make his case for himself, him or herself, versus just something in writing, or if someone's going to send in a pre-recorded statement, but there's never any dialogue, but you're able to dialogue with the victim advocates and other people who are there on their behalf.
Well, and Senator Singleton, I certainly understand the reason behind the question, as well as the reason that Representative England has asked the question. And I know that there has been a lot of conversation about this. We do dialogue tremendously with the family that or loved ones who come to support the inmate. The best way that I know how to answer this question is that I think this is a dialogue best had by you as the legislature, and I think it is one that has gone on significantly in the legislature. There's a lot that goes into an electronic communication between somebody in one of our many facilities in the Department of Corrections and the Parole Board. And that is, I'm going to tell y'all, I'm not the expert on that. That is a conversation that involves technology. That's a conversation that involves security in coordinating a whole lot of people and a whole lot of technology that, if I'm correct, I think that that y'all as the legislators have been having those conversations. So I'm just here to tell y'all what we do as a board, because it is important to us to hear from the inmate, and we do. And that I, as the chairman of this board, feel very confident in the work that our institutional parole officers do in a very lengthy conversation and interview that takes place with those inmates in light of a lot of things. And it's not just, I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you for that, Madam Chair, and I think that is a conversation that we as a committee will continue beyond today.
And
do you know, and you may not, we can get our legislative staff to research, what do other states do? Do y'all have colleagues that y'all talk to? Do other states allow that or not, or do you know?
Some do and some don't. Alabama is certainly not, from my understanding, is certainly not the only state where inmates do not appear at parole hearings. So it is unique to each and every state as to how they do it. The last thing, and I know there's certainly a lot of questions, but I think what's important to note is that after hearing from everyone, we vote, and sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't. But that's, like I said at the beginning, it's always congenial, professional, I couldn't have more respect for these individuals that I serve with. It is... There's always 3 votes recorded. One of the things that I'm so proud of with this board is that we believe in transparency. We announce every vote in every hearing. And we vote, we announce, or I should say I do because I'm the chairman, and I know we have members of the press here that can attest to this. We always announce how each member voted, whether it was to grant or to not deny a parole, or grant or to deny a pardon. And we also announce how each member voted for the set-off date. It takes 2 votes to do anything. One member cannot do anything. It takes at least 2 votes to grant a parole, or at least 2 votes to deny a parole. And all of those votes are announced in every hearing, because we believe that it is important for everyone that comes to that hearing to know exactly what happened. Those votes are also recorded in our minutes, which are always provided on the Bureau of Pardons and Parole's website as another step towards transparency.
Madam Chair, what happens when one of you are out for whatever reason?
It takes 2 members to have quorum, so those 2 members would carry on, and there are certain rules in play if there's a disagreement among those 2 members, if they do not reach a unanimous vote. But I can, in almost 6 years of being on the board, I could probably count on one hand that we did not have 3 members. All 3 of us take this job and this appointment so very seriously.
And I didn't mean to imply that, but I just know as
certainly.
humans we have things that come up from
Right.
time to time. So
Right.
I want to advance into the information that you provided us, I think yesterday. I had some questions, and then maybe we can have some more dialogue. Just on page 3, it talks about active offenders and inactive offenders. What's the difference between an active and an inactive offender?
And Senator Chambliss, I may have to refer you to either one of our members of the Bureau or to Director Ward, because some of this data is data from the Bureau. Again, as I referenced, we don't have a staff. So this material was provided from the Bureau. So I'm not sure who they included as inactive.
Madam Chair, that's problematic. We met with you back in January of this year, and we had these questions. And to date, we've not received a response from the board. We did receive this information from the Bureau, but I know these guys, they're going to ask those same questions today because they've not been answered. So we'll get an answer from the Bureau on that question. Let me move forward to another question that comes up. It talks about here compliance, I think, conformance.
Yes.
With the parole guidelines.
Yes.
Help me understand, just because I don't, how are those guidelines developed? Is that something that y'all do internally, that y'all set? Obviously, there's state law that gives some direction there, but how do those parole guidelines come about?
Well, the parole guidelines were developed before I became a member of the board. I have copies of the guidelines. If I have copies for everyone on the committee. If you don't have it, would y'all like a copy of those?
I would love to have a copy of that. So, someone could
is
bring
there someone I should hand these to?
Yeah, just come to the side over here. So those guidelines were developed in what year? Do you know?
2018, I believe.
And it is the parole board who has control over those guidelines, or is it somebody else?
Well, they're statutory, and we have the board has the ability to. I've just lost the word that I'm looking for.
To amend, adjust.
Amend them. Thank you so much, Chairman. To amend them. So the guidelines are it is required that we consider them in every case before we make a decision. And so you can see on the guidelines the things that are considered. The severity of the offense, and as you see, everything is given a grade or a point, either a 0, a 1, or a 2. Then there's the risk assessment. As you may, and I'm sure have often heard of, the Ohio risk assessment is used. Then we have the static 99 for sex offenders. Then you turn over and you have institutional behavior, which, if I may speak to that only briefly, you get 1 point if you have a nonviolent disciplinary, and that's whether you have one disciplinary in the past 12 months or you have 27 disciplinaries in the past 12 months. You get 1 point for that, no matter how many of them you may have. You get 2 if you have a disciplinary involving violence. And then you get 5 points if you have 2 or more. The most points you can get for that is 5. So it doesn't matter if you have 3 disciplinaries or more for violence, the most points you get is 5. Then we have...
Madam Chair.
Yes.
And this is very helpful, very helpful. However, this is a score sheet for the guidelines.
Yes.
Who says that one or more nonviolent disciplinaries within 12 months gets 1 point? Who says that?
The people that developed these guidelines roughly 6-7 years ago.
And those people are not the board? There's some other... Who is that?
I don't know who. I could not tell you who those people were. I was not employed. I was not on the board at that time.
Representative England, can you answer that?
Yeah, and see, in 2019, when we passed the law that created where we are now, part of that code section says the board reviews its criteria every 3 years, and after an open comment period, the criteria will then be, the new criteria will be posted on the board's website.
That's right.
If I'm not mistaken, you were appointed in 2019, 2020?
That's right. That's right.
It's 2024.
That's
when
right.
can we expect a review of the current guidelines?
Very soon.
It's been you're about 2 years overdue. And
Fair enough.
So a question that comes from the chair about the methodology that we currently use, and you say, well, I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how it was drafted. I just used the score sheet that is now several years out of date, because the reason that we require them to be done every 3 years is because criteria changes, methodology changes. The data is supposed to inform your decisions, and that changes. So in order for us to have a process that we can have any faith in, it would help for us to not only have an up-to-date one, but also that the folks that are required to use it understand where it came from.
I'm happy to give you my understanding of the people that helped to develop it, that were there during 2 previous administrations.
But you've had the opportunity since you've been appointed to do this yourself. As a matter of fact, the law mandates that you were supposed to have this done already.
Okay, and Representative England, I know that you refer to, I've had the opportunity to do it myself. I am not the only. I understand, and there is a conversation, and there have been meetings. Let me think how many meetings, probably in upwards of 10 meetings, where we have been actively meeting and discussing the revision of this document, where we have met with our statistician at the Bureau, may I finish? Where we have met with our statistician, and well, I say ours, again, the bureaus, because I do think that it is very, may I finish, where it is very important to note again that the board has no staff. So we meet with the bureau's statistician, as well as attorneys, the board as a whole. It is an ongoing conversation, because it would be no good for anyone for the board to suggest changes to these guidelines overnight to just say, you know what, let's just throw out the following changes just for the sake of changing them. So it is a thoughtful process where we have been meeting about that for 18 months.
Madam Chair, with all due respect, when I asked you who developed the guidelines and you didn't tell me that, thus the questioning. I don't know. I really don't. I didn't. But when I ask a question like that, you should tell me what you're doing and why and how and where. That just gives me an air of you're just not going to be forthright with me. So,
well, I apologize, Chairman, if that is the case. I am doing my best to answer questions when I'm not
giving. Ask a very simple question. Very simple question. Representative Simpson, I'll come back to you. Representative Simpson.
Okay. You have a very difficult job. You are in a very difficult position. As you talk about with your committee, with people that have different opinions and different backgrounds and different formulations as to why what you guys do, we have different opinions as well on our committee is what we go through and what we have. I can tell you, this is the first time I've seen a parole guideline, and I'm very appreciative for you to provide this to us today. But to look at the guidelines and say, well, if the guidelines say you should get out, then why is the parole board not doing something to get out? That bothers me because of the sense of, you look at a severity of the conviction, the highest is 2 points. If you're somebody is a high severity of, let's say murder, some of the highest of conviction that can possibly be there, it's only 2 points. You have to have higher than 7 to get suggested for parole denial. So the guidelines themselves create this formulation of, let's look into how you can commit a murder, have people opposed to it, have people look through this stuff. Your actual assessment may show that you may actually be a moderate risk to reoffend, and you still don't qualify as being someone that should be stayed in prison according to the guidelines. That's why I don't believe in the guideline process. I don't believe the guidelines solve. I believe the effort of you guys looking into each individual case, looking into what's going on through there, more so than cut blank, everything fits into a nice piece of paper. Because I can tell you, if there is a murder case where someone commits a murder and they have a risk to offend, that's increased risk to offend, and the guidelines still say that they're supposed to get out, I want you guys to do exactly what you're doing and making sure and going through the step process and not going on a paint by number fits everybody through the single description. Now, do we need to talk about how these guidelines go through? I think that's a discussion we probably need to have, and this is the first time we've had this talk. But I think there's work that can be done, but I do want to let everybody know there is some negatives with just a blanket. If the guidelines tell you to do it, why aren't you doing it? Because the guidelines don't tell the full story.
Well, and let me follow up with that. Because I think we're hitting on similar things from different directions at this end, obviously. But my point, and the reason that I was trying to get to the bottom of this is, if we, as state government, that includes you all, us, executive, legislative, if we develop the guidelines and say what the guidelines are, it seems like we should be hitting them more than 20, 25% of the time. So do we just change the guidelines to fit what we're doing? That's the whole reason for my questioning, because from my perspective, from a technical perspective, you have a guideline, you have a standard, we would call it in my world, and if you can't hit that standard, but 25 or 20% of the time, something's wrong with the standard. It's not objective. So my questioning was, who develops those? Who can amend those, change those, and what that process, how does that occur?
And if I may just have just a moment to do my best to answer that question, and I'm going to apologize if I fumble through this a little bit. This is not my everyday thing that I do to come and appear in this room before y'all. So if I'm not doing my best to answer your question, it is not because I'm not trying to. So
thank you.
If you'll just
without interruption.
So I apologize. This board is yes, this board is responsible and plays a role in these guidelines. But also, as it's been talked about, it then goes up for public comment. It's not solely a function of this board. I think that's one of the beautiful things about government, is that the public has a role in it. It goes before the legislative committee that Othni's on. I don't know all the names for these things, and that's why part of me gets nervous when I come up here and try to answer y'all's questions. And I could tell you names of people like Meredith, people that, who don't work there anymore. And I don't know that it's right for me to throw out people's names when everybody's unhappy with something, and I can.
Well, Madam Chair, we didn't ask you for a name.
I thought y'all did. I thought you were asking me who wrote these, and I can tell you the names, and I can tell you that Council of State Government was very active in the development of these. I can tell you all of that. So that's why I'm struggling right now to know how you want me to answer that question. It's not that I'm evading your question, Chairman. And that's why I don't want you to feel that I was evading your question in any...
Knowing what I know now, the answer to the question is staff at the board of the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles develop this information.
Yes.
They review it with us. We have a public comment period, and we, as the board, adopt the parole guidelines. That's the answer.
Yes.
Am I interpreting that?
And we have been working for 18 months in a very methodical way, along with statisticians and as the board, to figure out what are the right amendments, and we've been looking at other states and how they do guidelines, how they measure risk, because it's important for us to get amendments right. Not to just say, well, let's just reweight this in a certain way. We want to know what is the right way to measure risk? What are risks that are important to look at? What is the correct and the fair way to do this? And we think that takes a long time to get that right, not an overnight process.
So I get that, and I don't disagree with that. That should be done very deliberately and with a lot of input and due diligence. In looking at the information, again, I've not had time to study it in detail, but the officers that you have that go out and interview these applicants,
Yes, sir.
are putting together information that says how they relate to the guidelines that are guidelines established by the board. So the Bureau is saying they meet this criteria, and almost 3/4 of the time, the board's saying it doesn't matter that they meet this criteria, we're not going to parole. So it seems like one of the two needs to be adjusted to reality. And I don't know which. I'm looking at it and trying to figure. You set the rules. The board sets the rules. They're called parole guidelines. And that, I'm just having a hard time understanding conformance to your own rules is in the 20 percentile. I guess that's my question. That's open-ended. Why is that, if you actually write the rules yourself?
Well, I would say that none of us that are currently on the board wrote those rules. But what we do, to the best of our ability, is to look at every individual that comes before us. And as long as I am on this board, that is what I will do. I will look at every piece of information that I can possibly look at. And I know that I began by giving y'all a list that was certainly not all-inclusive, that tells me everything I can possibly know about everyone that comes before me. I will never make a decision based upon a quota, a statistic, a number. I mean, what would happen if we paroled 80% and number 81 got before us? And I said, well, that's not going to happen today.
Well, Madam Chair, let me interrupt you there. With all due respect, I did not say that we should have a quota or 80% of those requesting. That was not my questioning at all. My questioning is, government makes the standard, government judges by that standard, and one entity is saying they meet the standard and the other entity says they're not. I don't know how to rectify those two. That's what I'm getting at. Now, you could have 0% parolees on any given day, any given month, maybe even a longer period than that, and that would be the appropriate number for those particular individuals. I get that. I see that. I mean, some of the examples that were given. But when a government entity creates the standard and doesn't match the standard has to be changed in a proper procedure, in a proper process. Or we got to figure out why. That, to me, we should never say, well, we've got to parole 50% of the people. We should never say that because we don't know. We don't know those individual situations. However, when we create a standard, we create a guideline, and we're obviously differing of opinions on whether that individual meets that standard or not, we've got to figure that out and figure out why and what. So that was why I was asking that. Who develops it? If it's strictly up to the legislature, then maybe we need to draft another bill, But if it's up to you all who should know or do know more about this than certainly we do, help us resolve that. Help us figure that out. Because to me, one of the biggest pet peeves I have with government is saying, you all do this, but we as government don't have to do that. That's not right. When government says the public has to do something, we should do it as well. So that was my line of questioning. That was the reason for my questioning. Representative England.
But you mentioned that we asked several questions at the beginning of the year that have not been answered.
Yes, sir.
We actually had a meeting in this room in 2019 where more questions were posed that were also never answered. One of the things that was discovered and discussed at that meeting in this room years ago was, I think you mentioned to us that you actually changed the score sheets because you didn't think they reflected what was most important in the decision-making process. So do you still change the score sheets to fit whatever you're trying to accomplish when you're questioning or making a determination of whether or not someone gets paroled?
I'm glad you...
Because if you are, in fact, changing the guidelines, then we shouldn't be 2 years beyond when you've had the opportunity for people to have public comment to create our standard that apparently, for you specifically, only 8% of the applicants reach. Because I don't think the public knows that not only do we have guidelines that aren't being used right now, but that you, as one of the people who actually assesses the applicant, you change it.
Thank you, Representative England, for bringing that up. I'm glad that you did because I remember that conversation very well. What I referenced in that meeting here in this room was that I change the guidelines and did in the same way just this week when there are mistakes on the guidelines, specifically in terms of disciplinaries, and that I amend them in the favor of the inmate. And that is what I
don't want you to. I don't want you just because I asked you in 2019 specifically how many times when you changed the score sheet, because you didn't say guidelines, you also said the score sheet, which is what we're looking at right here. You said that some of the criteria needs to be weighted more. So you would change it to reflect that. What I asked you then, and it's been 5 years, I asked you, I said, how many times when you change the score sheet does it weigh in favor of the applicant? I'm still awaiting that answer.
And I told you then, and I will tell you now, that it always weighs in favor of the inmate. I have never changed a score sheet, as you referenced, what I would reference a guideline, in the other direction just this week. And I have Mr. Littleton and Mrs. Simmons here that can testify in that same way, that I amended a guideline sheet where it had a 1 for a discipline, and I looked and I found there were no disciplines in the past 12 months, so I amended it to a 0, and that is what I told you in that meeting in 2019, and that is what I'm telling you now.
So
I will always check to make sure that those guidelines are correct, because
I think one of the things that you've done today, and I really appreciate it, is that you inadvertently made the case that the board needs oversight. Because standards that are being created, obviously only 20%, and in your case, 8% of the applicants can reach the standard and the guidelines that we paid for to create. Again, either they're broken or the process itself is broken. But also, to hear that what we paid for and then the creation of it is not being followed, and not only not followed, but altered, also underscores the fact that somebody else needs to be involved in this process. Because if you're saying that you have to amend the score sheet or the guidelines to benefit the applicant, and it only gets to 8% release, there is a problem in the system. And the reason in 2019, because I was there, and when this bill passed, is we put the review for 3 years was to give you an opportunity for the new person to get started, to figure out where the problems are, and then come back and create guidelines. So in 2024, we're not having this discussion because guess what? We've got new guidelines that match the intent of the legislation as it was passed then. So the fact that we're here now and we've got these basic fundamental questions about process, because you can't imagine we got a process that we created that only as it stands now, only 20% of the applicants reach. At one point, it was at 8% and 7% and 6%, and Senator Chambliss has been establishing there's a problem there. So that's why when we passed the law and put the guidelines in there and then had a review and an open comment period, it was supposed to be done long before now, and especially considering that you've already acknowledged back in 2019 you had an issue with the score sheets and the guidelines because you were changing them.
to the benefit of the inmate.
To the benefit of the inmate, to only reach 8% of the people that came before you. Does that not suggest to you that there's a fundamental problem with either the process or the guidelines themselves, especially considering that the guidelines suggest sometimes that the applicants who apply should be over 50 to 60%. And those aren't looking at each individual case, they're taking the data because that's black and white. But in order to help you out in your decision-making process, it would be better if you had a methodology that was dependable so you can actually come in here and say, you know what, the reason why I'm denying all these folks is because either the guidelines are wrong or here's why. The other point that you mentioned, and I'll stop because this could go on for decades. You mentioned transparency in your process. The only thing you talked about transparency-wise was the votes. And I'll tell you, it's oftentimes difficult to find out. You have to go back and look at the minutes. But the other part of transparency is also revealing to the people what exactly you used to make the determination that this person was not worthy of release. And it can't be something as arbitrary as something that happened years ago, because these folks can't go back and fix what's wrong if they don't know what's wrong. And I've told you, your Commissioner Ham spoke today very eloquently about the mission that he's on and he's required to do, and all the money that we spend to make his job easier, but also to prepare people who've been released or are getting ready to be released to be successful. In order for that process to work, in the hope to continue to persist within the system so people can be managed with expectation, is for them to know that all the work they do while they're incarcerated materializes into a valid, something that's not arbitrary, and a meaningful review process, so they'll know that either I earned it or I didn't. Otherwise, when they go back to the facility, guess what happens? Violence, drug abuse. We end up spending billions of dollars for people that don't even need to be incarcerated anymore. All they're doing is we're just employing them at this point.
So one of the questions that I'd ask in January is looking at the rates of individuals who are assigned, and I might not get the terminology right, because it's just not what I do on a day-to-day basis, but the rate of parole for those that were of minimal risk was actually lower than those of medium risk. Is that information in this data, or if it is, I can't figure it out.
I think that the best answer to your question in this data, in my opinion, is on the last 2 pages. And that is where we provided a what's called the random sample of board parole decisions in 2024. And I apologize if I'm not answering, if I'm not tracking with what you're asking. But
Madam Chair, it's been since January. If you didn't understand my question, certainly you didn't have to wait till today to clarify it. Madam Chair, I'm getting very, very frustrated. I asked this question in January.
I apologize. I'm trying to answer that.
Okay, the question is.
Yes, sir.
I had been told, and I looked, and I saw data that indicated to me that there may be truth to it, that we are paroling at a lower rate for low risk than we are at a high risk, medium risk. I think I just said that backwards. We are paroling at a higher rate for medium risk than low. So, or vice versa. That was the whole point. We didn't know what was the answer. Is that correct? Is that not correct? So does this data, not a sample, but does this data prove one way or the other?
Are you wanting to know if that is a correct statement, or are you wanting to know what that proves? I'm just wanting to make sure I understand what the question is.
Okay, some people say that we are paroling, we are not paroling low risk in order to make them work.
Okay. May I will certainly answer that question.
Is the data in this packet? It was my first question. That I can look at that and see.
That we are not paroling low risk people so that they can work. Okay. Well, first and foremost, we have nothing to do with who's on work release. I mean, that's solely a function of the Department of Corrections. And I want to say first and foremost that the risk assessment the Department of Corrections uses to determine who is placed on work release is an entirely different risk assessment than what the board uses to determine their risk for being placed on parole or not. But if you'll look at page 8 in the data or the packet that we provided to you, it shows that the grant rate for people who score low is at 22%, and that's a conformance to the guidelines at 25%. Is that the number that you're looking for, Chairman?
So this starts, I guess, to answer the question, for someone that's a low risk, not an individual, but as a group, their parole rate's 22%,
That's right.
and the moderate risk is at 23%. So essentially the same rate.
That's right. 1 point difference.
So I guess it seems to me, from a layman's point of view, if someone is a low risk, they would be paroled at a higher rate than someone at a moderate risk.
Mr. Chairman, can I help with that a
Sure,
little bit, just
sure.
from my
Representative
background through there? If someone has committed a violent offense against a domestic violence partner, they may not be of a higher risk to reoffend to another offense. The risk assessment is the risk that they pose to the community once they get out. So you could be a violent offender that you may not be as high of a risk to reoffend because you committed that offense. That would not indicate to them that they've served their time for the offense they've already committed. Just because you may not be a risk to reoffend doesn't mean that you should be paroled. There should be a sentence of, you've got to serve the time for what you've already done, as opposed to, okay, well, you're probably not going to do it again. We got to let you out.
So we see here people that are a very high risk on the Ohio risk assessment. They're paroled. The grant rate is 6%. People that are scored a high risk, and this is in the year 2024, that they score a high risk on the Ohio risk assessment. They were paroled at 14%. People who are a moderate risk on the Ohio risk assessment, the grant rate was 23%, and then people low risk on the Ohio risk assessment were paroled at 22%. So again, 1% difference between low and moderate, and obviously the parole rate decreases as you go up in severity in your risk assessment on the Ohio risk assessment. What I was referring to earlier on your last 2 pages, which I think or I hope answers some questions about what the board is doing in our decision making, is giving you, and I'll point you to number 26 if you look at, and it doesn't have a page number, I apologize, it's your next to last page. Number 26, or line item 26, it's a murder conviction. The risk level is low. And that's again on the Ohio risk assessment. The offense severity is high. This person, and we have stripped all identifying information from this so that we were able to provide this to the committee to give you an idea of what the board does every day. He's been to prison 1 time. We see that he or she has had disciplinaries within the past 12 months. We know it's a victim case. The person was given a life sentence. They went to prison in 2013 on that life sentence. And the cell block behavior is poor. The guidelines suggest that the person be paroled. And I think that's important. We just talked about how it's a low risk level, murder, high offense, disciplines in the last 12 months has served roughly, what, y'all are better than math than that. What is that? 11 years on a life sentence, poor cell block behavior, but the guidelines suggest that the person be paroled. The board denied parole on that. Okay, then we can look at number 7, line item 7, burglary in the 3rd degree. of a residence. Risk level, moderate on the Ohio risk assessment. Offense severity is low of a burglary of a home. Has been to prison 3 times. No supervision failures. Disciplines within the past 12 months. It is a victim case. Sentence was 60 months. Went to prison September of 2023 with a minimum release date of 2027. Poor cell block behavior. The guidelines suggest the person be paroled. We denied it. This is to give you our best way of compiling a sample of cases that we've heard in the last year. Because
Madam Chair.
the guidelines, and we've talked about that, of course.
Madam Chair,
I'm sorry.
at our meeting in January,
Yes, sir.
this group asked 6 or 7 questions. You said that you would answer those questions. Your counsel wrote those questions down. I want the answer to those questions by the end of November. All of this revolves around those same, we've already asked these questions, but we've not gotten answers. That's why these men are frustrated. You know the questions. Counsel, do you have the questions that we asked? Okay. We want the answers to those questions, not in a bunch of data, and we want data to support it, but I don't need to try to figure it. We ask specific questions. We want specific answers. All right. We have time for each member of the committee to ask one more question, and then I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Representative England. We'll start with Representative Simpson.
I think we're all talking from the same language here because we all have frustration with the guidelines. I will tell members of the committee, based on the random sample that she has provided to us, on the second page, and this is me just going through it today, on the second to last page, for the offense of murder, I am showing 5 offenses of murder that are in there. Sentencing dates of 1999, 1975, 1999, 2013, and 1999. Under each one of those offenses of murder, including the 2013 murder, and I'll focus on that 2013 murder because the 2013 sentencing date of murder is a life in prison sentence. The guidelines suggested, yes, they should be released. That's a problem with the guidelines. That's an issue because people that have these sentences, we're talking the worst of the worst. The guidelines say they have to get out. So I understand why they're not following it, but we have to fix the guidelines. And I think that's what everybody's on this page is talking about. I think we're all on the same agreement of something is wrong with the documentation of the guidelines because when someone's got a life sentence for a murder and the guidelines are telling you 11 years later that they're supposed to be released, that's a problem with the guidelines.
Thank you. Representative England.
Just real quick, I don't agree with that simply because if we have a process of reformation and redemption and forgiveness, the guidelines reflect someone who appears before the parole board that meets data supported by historical data, but also it doesn't mean that the person that appears before the board that day is the same person that they were many years ago. That's what we believe in forgiveness. That's the whole point. But also, to suggest that means that someone who's committed a violent offense in their lifetime should never be released. And simply put, the process of parole is to assess that person 20 years later to determine if they are, in fact, a risk to reoffend. Again, not every person that commits a criminal offense at one point in their life is the same person they are 15, 20 years later. But the worst part about this is that we passed a law in 2019, right, that gives the parole board the ability to, if there is an issue with the guidelines, to fix it. in 2019, we asked questions. In 2024, we asked questions because we were trying to get to the heart of this problem we're discussing right now, and we're still having it to the point that we had to be browbeaten, embarrassed, and ashamed by the fact that the process is not working in order to get to the point here today of celebrating a 20% release rate, because what you're asking us to believe that out of, if 100 people applied for parole, we'll say last year, 100 people applied for parole, that only 8 of that 100 was eligible. And I guarantee you that all of them were probably nonviolent. But the process of parole wasn't supposed to be picking the easy cases. The process of parole was to create an exhaustive process to make a determination if that person, even if they committed a murder years ago, will not reoffend if they get out. Otherwise, we're wasting time. We're wasting money. We don't need a junior college in our prison if you commit a violent offense or some sort of offense that will make you parole ineligible forever. We're wasting money. We're wasting time. But I can also suggest to you that with a parole system that only releases 8% of the population that applies, or 20% of the population, we are wasting money and wasting time. And bottom line, Mr. Chair, I think one thing that we can agree on is we will not be able to afford it, either through building facilities that are well over $1 billion, or to try to care for an aging population that would be better served outside of the facility, when we just recently paid $1 billion in a healthcare contract that's already failing. Hell, they're not even paying some of their contractors. So we can't afford it. So the process itself has to work one way or another. We are at the point where we can either determine if it's the guidelines, and if it's the guidelines, we fix it. But if it's a personnel problem, we need to fix that too.
Thank you, Representative England. Senator Roberts.
Madam Chair, thank you for being here today along with your committee.
Thank you.
We can communicate better. That would be one thing I'd say, and maybe we need to meet in person, do something else. But I would suggest, as Chairman Chambliss said, when we ask questions, let's just get them back. We want to help you do your job well. I don't think any of us want your job. I'm grateful for what you do. We've got to communicate better, and I'll just leave it at that. But thank you guys for coming today.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Senator Singleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Chairman, for coming today and answering these questions or attempting to answer questions to the best of your ability. You have to understand that we're frustrated because we have constituents that call us about their loved ones and people who are incarcerated. When they get that phone call and say, hey, I'm going up for parole tomorrow. I've done everything that's possible. I've gone through all the drug programs. I've gone through everything that they've asked me to do. And once they get there, and something like the guidelines and the weight that you put on it, then tell them no. And that frustration goes back, as we said, to repeat criminality inside of the facilities. Outside of the guidelines, what other weighted product do you put on saying yes or no to a person, whether they grant it or not?
Well, thank you, Senator Singleton, for that question. It's good to talk with you.
Yes,
I don't think
please.
you and I have talked very much here today. One of the things we were talking about right before we came over here today was actually health and mental illness. I feel very fortunate with the 2 board members that I have to work with, because they're just very thoughtful human beings. And we had a case just this week with somebody who had a very unique health situation, without revealing much at all. And we made a decision that didn't even come close to conforming with the guidelines. and that's hard. I think part of what's hard about this hearing in many ways is that I don't get to really share the insight that I have into Mr. Littleton and Mrs. Simmons and who they are as human beings, as parents, and just people. But for as many times that can be handpicked out that we don't conform with the guidelines to deny parole, there's times when we don't conform and grant parole for somebody that's a high offense and high risk to reoffend and doesn't have anywhere to go. That nobody comes and talks on their behalf, and we sit around and scrounge up an idea of a home plan, of a halfway house for them to go to that can meet a unique health need. Where we look, as I was talking about earlier, when I talked about their social background, and we look and we see that a drug problem is probably the result of a severe history of abuse that dates back. And their home plan is to go and to live with a relative in a part of the state where there's just really no resources. And we recommend that they're paroled upon approval to a halfway house because we know that that's the assistance that they need. This is probably a long road of answering your question, but when you say what other things do we look at, those are some of the things that we're looking at. We're looking at a social background to try to understand how this person got to where they are.
Do you work with Director Ward in the PrEP program?
We do.
To say that
We do.
This person may be here, he may not have that home plan, or he may not have that those skills that we want him to have, but we will say, if you go and go to his program, and upon that program, then we can get you paroled. Do y'all ever look at those kind of weighted positions?
We do. We love the PrEP program. So Mr. Littleton and I were there. We've been around since the beginning of the PrEP program. And we've been there. We toured it before the PrEP program ever even opened. We saw it kind of grow from before anybody ever stepped foot in there other than Cam and Mr. Littleton and I. We've been down there for graduations, kept up with families whose loved ones have been through the PrEP program. Whenever families are there for a hearing and we send their loved one to the PrEP program, we explain to them what's going to happen from day one as far as transportation, and that they don't have to provide it, that we're going to provide it, what's going to happen when their loved one gets there, and they're going to be assessed for whatever needs they have. We look a lot of times to see if somebody hasn't had programming in prison and they need it. A lot of times those are our candidates for PrEP, is to be able to get them the programming that they need that they haven't had. If we look and see if there's not a day reporting center where they're going, or they just need a little extra attention, we like to use PrEP for that. But we're always really conscientious that we fill up every class at PrEP because we think it is such a good program, and we don't want to not use every space that we have.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Singleton, for that question.
Madam Chair, or either of the other board members, do you have any final comments or statement or anything that you want to make before we wrap up?
If I may, and I'll just ask this, and then certainly anything that Gabrielle or Daryl would like to say. We want to be as responsive as we can to this committee. And Senator Roberts, I agree with you completely. Communication is always the key. I've been in state government my whole life. And that's why we try to talk as much as we can with people that come to the hearings. I feel that I probably have certainly not answered y'all's questions in the way you want me to today, and that's not for a lack of trying. But I want to make sure that this board understands exactly what the questions are that y'all have, because I feel that there's probably a frustration that we're not answering the questions that you have, and I can assure you that it's not because we don't want to. I'm not sure we know exactly what the questions are that you have for us. Could there be a way that we could communicate?
Your counsel wrote them down when we met.
Okay.
He was sitting right beside you.
Okay. Well, we will certainly, we will work on that, and we will make
So,
sure.
Madam Chair, you said that you would answer the questions that day we sat in your office. You said that. So what has been going on from the time that you said you would answer the questions till today? Disregard?
No, sir. No, sir.
Well, how could we interpret it any other way? It's been months. In a month or two, it'll be a year. And you're asking us to sit down and do that again? I got better things to do than sit down and then be disregarded. I'll be blunt. So, if your counsel wants to get with me and show me what his questions are, I'll clarify. We'll do whatever we have to do to get the questions. But to go from January till almost the end of October and not even know what the questions are is beyond my comprehension.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Meeting dismissed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.